Buried alive, the canine who exposed the unthinkable. The sky over Hazelwood Cemetery was the kind of gray that made everything feel heavier, like even the clouds had come to mourn. Major Gabriel Moreno's casket sat at the center of it all, draped in an American flag, surrounded by strangers in black. His service was brief, dignified, hollow, but the eyes that watched the coffin closest weren't human. They were golden brown, focused, unblinking. Shadow hadn't moved in hours. The retired German shepherd lay at the foot of the casket like a soldier still on duty. No one thought much of it. Dogs grieve too, right? But grief doesn't growl, and it doesn't howl like something ancient breaking loose from the earth. When Shadow sprang up and began clawing at the coffin, people gasped, then froze, then panicked. Because beneath the wood came a knock. One knock, then another. What if the funeral wasn't the end, but a cover-up? The wind at Hazelwood Cemetery carried the weight of more than just weather. It carried silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, stifling kind that presses down on your shoulders like a grief that hasn't yet found its voice. A gray veil of clouds sagged low over the headstones, as if the sky itself couldn't bear to watch what was about to unfold. Rows of folding chairs had been set out along the gravel path, most now filled with solemn figures dressed in black. Veterans sat in the front row, stiff-backed despite their age, medals glinting faintly through the overcast gloom. Beside them were townsfolk who'd known Gabriel Moreno as more than a soldier. To them, he was the quiet man who helped repair fences, who never missed the Memorial Day parade, who remembered everyone's name, even if they forgot his. He had lived without extravagance, and now, apparently, he would be buried in the same way. At the far end of the funeral assembly, just a few steps from the open grave, sat a wooden casket draped with an American flag folded, precise, impersonal. A bugler stood ready, trumpet at his side, though the final notes had not yet been called. The priest adjusted his robe, thumbing nervously through his notes. A soldier's death always carried more weight, more eyes. But even he could feel it. Something about today felt wrong. Lying at the foot of the casket, with his head resting on the cold earth and his body unnaturally still, was Shadow, a black and sable German shepherd who hadn't moved in over 30 minutes. His ears didn't twitch at the breeze. His eyes, clouded and fixed on the wood of the casket, looked more hollow than mourning. Not even when the funeral procession arrived had he stirred. It was as though he had turned to stone the moment his partner's heart stopped. Major Gabriel Moreno had died 2 days earlier, or so they were told. The report was simple: sudden cardiac arrest at home. No signs of distress, no known medical conditions. Just gone. In his sleep. Peacefully. But there was something about that explanation that hadn't settled in the bones of those who knew Gabriel best. He was 62, strong for his age, still hiked, still did push-ups every morning, still walked Shadow twice a day, rain, shine, or snow, still wrote letters to his fallen brothers every Veterans Day and burned them at the edge of his property, because that's what ritual looked like when you couldn't afford therapy. His wife had died years ago. No children. His only remaining family was Shadow, his partner through 2 tours, one in Afghanistan and one at home on K-9 rescue detail. And now the town had gathered to say goodbye to one of their own, even if the goodbye didn't feel quite real. Marcus Hale stood in the second row, shoulders squared beneath a navy blazer that hadn't fit properly in years. He was a fellow veteran, had served with Gabriel in Kandahar. They weren't best friends, not in the way civilians understood the term. But they had bled the same sand, trusted each other with loaded weapons, and that made them brothers, whether or not they ever said it out loud. His eyes kept drifting to Shadow. "I've never seen a dog mourn like that," a voice whispered beside him. It was Evelyn, the town librarian, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "It's like he's given up." Marcus didn't answer. He just kept staring at the shepherd, the way his chest barely rose, the way his tail hadn't moved once. Shadow wasn't grieving. He was waiting. The priest cleared his throat. "If we're all ready," he said gently, "let us begin." He opened his Bible and began to speak. But even as the words of comfort and remembrance left his mouth, something in the air had shifted. The clouds hadn't moved. The wind was still mild. But something deeper unseen began to hum beneath the surface of the moment. Shadow's ears twitched. It was the first time he had moved all morning. Marcus noticed. Then Shadow raised his head, slowly, as though waking from a trance. He stood, his legs trembling slightly beneath his aging frame. The movement caused a few people nearby to glance over, some smiling weakly, assuming the dog was finally acknowledging the loss. Then he growled. It was low, barely audible, but guttural, feral, alive. Marcus's heart tightened. "Something's wrong," he whispered. The priest paused mid-sentence, and then it happened. Shadow let out a howl so long, so shattering, that it ripped through the crowd like a scream bottled up for years. His voice cracked the funeral stillness like thunder cracks glass. Birds scattered from nearby trees. Children clutched their parents. One woman gasped. And before anyone could react, Shadow leapt toward the casket, his claws scraping over the flag-draped wood, then pounding against the side digging, striking, howling again. "What's he doing?" someone shouted. "Get him off," said another. But Marcus didn't move. His feet were cemented to the ground, eyes wide, breath caught, because he heard it too. Knocking. From inside the casket, 3 soft raps. Then 2 more. The sound didn't echo, didn't carry like a figment or a hallucination. It was real. It was alive. People stood up. A woman screamed. The priest dropped his Bible. Someone yelled to call 911. Shadow backed away, panting hard, but his eyes remained locked on the coffin. Marcus took one trembling step forward. "No," he said aloud to no one and everyone. "No, this isn't right." He turned, searching. "Where's the carpenter? Lewis, open it. Now." "But," the man stammered. "Open it!" Marcus roared. Shadow growled again, as if translating the urgency in a language only dogs speak. Lewis hesitated only a moment longer, then ran to his truck. And just as he returned with the crowbar, the faint knocking came again. Slower, weaker. The entire town held its breath. What lay inside that casket was no longer something to bury. It was someone still fighting to breathe. The priest had barely reached the second verse of the eulogy when the world tilted. His voice, soft and tremulous, floated over the rows of mourners like a fragile veil. "And though our brother Gabriel walks now beyond the veil, may we find peace in knowing he is at rest." But the sentence never reached its end, because from the edge of the casket Shadow moved. It wasn't a twitch. It wasn't the stiff shuffle of a grieving animal trying to adjust. It was sudden, alert, as if an invisible switch had flipped deep within his bones. The old shepherd rose with a trembling kind of purpose-ears back, muscles tense, nose flaring toward the casket like something inside it was calling him. His tail was stiff. His stance, no longer sorrowful, had turned protective. And then, before anyone could utter a word, Shadow growled. Low, deep, primal. A sound that made the hairs on the back of Marcus Hale's neck rise, even from several feet away. It was the kind of growl he remembered from war zones, right before Shadow lunged toward an IED, right before Shadow pulled a wounded soldier from fire. The priest froze mid-sentence, glancing at the dog. "Is he okay?" someone whispered. Shadow snarled again. Then he howled. It wasn't just sound. It was a cry torn from the deepest pit of instinct, stretched across time, across memory, across something no one else in that cemetery could understand. It was agony. It was warning. The shepherd lunged forward. Claws skittered across the polished wood of the casket as he leapt onto the lowered platform. Shadow began pawing, then scratching at the flag-draped coffin with unrelenting desperation. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," the priest urged, stepping back, his hand trembling slightly. But calm was no longer on the table. Gasps broke the silence. A child began to cry. "Is he trying to dig him out?" someone asked, voice quaking. "Pull him back," a woman shouted. "He's not supposed to." "Let him work," Marcus muttered under his breath, though he wasn't sure who he was talking to. Himself? God? Or maybe Shadow? His eyes were fixed on the dog, frozen by something deeper than fear. Then came the sound. Knock. Once, twice, a pause. Knock, knock, knock. It was faint, muffled, but it was real. It didn't come from the ground, or a branch, or someone's clumsy footstep. It came from inside the coffin. A moment of absolute silence followed. No one dared breathe. The only sound was Shadow's labored panting as he stepped back slightly from the casket, his nails bloody from clawing at the wood. Did you hear that?" Evelyn asked, clutching her purse with both hands like it might shield her from whatever came next. Someone dropped their coffee thermos. It hit the gravel with a thud. Knock. This time louder, urgent, unmistakable. The priest took 2 steps backward, his face pale. His mouth opened, but no words came, and then the crowd began to move. Panic doesn't always come as a scream. Sometimes it's a ripple, people shifting in their seats, hands tightening on coats, eyes darting toward exits. The back row scattered first, then others followed, a wave of uncertainty washing over the assembly. Gabriel Moreno had been declared dead. This was supposed to be his farewell. But now, "Jesus," someone whispered. "He's still in there." No, that's impossible," another muttered. "They wouldn't bury someone alive." "Right? That doesn't happen anymore. Not in real life." A woman sobbed. "I knew something was wrong. I felt it. Why didn't we check?" Shadow let out another bark, sharp and commanding this time, as if urging the humans to stop debating and act. Marcus snapped out of his trance and bolted toward the coffin. "Get it open!" he shouted, pushing past folding chairs and startled mourners. "Wait, stop! What are you doing?" the priest called, reaching for Marcus's shoulder. Marcus shrugged him off. "He's alive. I heard it. And that dog, he knows it too." Lewis, the town carpenter, hesitated at the edge of the crowd, holding a small pry bar that had been tucked into his work bag in the truck. Marcus locked eyes with him. "Lewis, now." I need permission," Lewis stammered, voice cracking. "Consider this permission," Marcus growled. "Open the damn casket." Lewis ran forward, stumbling once on the gravel, then steadying himself as he mounted the wooden platform. Shadow made room, stepping aside as though he knew what had to happen. Lewis paused, hands trembling. And then, crack. The crowbar slid between the seam. Crack, clunk, crack. The crowd held its collective breath with every jolt of metal against wood. Shadow stood beside Marcus, his fur bristling. His eyes never left the lid. Then came a sound that silenced everything, a wheeze, a human gasp. And as the lid cracked open 2 inches, fingers emerged pale, twitching, grasping at the air like drowning hands breaking the surface of still water. Someone screamed. Shadow whimpered just once, but his tail wagged ever so slightly. Gabriel Moreno was alive, and the world would never be the same again. The air split open when the lid came loose. The wooden casket groaned, hinges creaking like old bones as Lewis wedged the crowbar one final time. With a reluctant crack, the top half of the lid jerked upward, and there, beneath the pale silk lining, Gabriel Moreno moved. A hand. Just a hand at first. Ashen, trembling, fingers twitching as though fumbling through a fog he hadn't yet escaped. Then a breath shallow, barely audible but unmistakably real. A gasp rippled through the crowd. "Dear God," Evelyn whispered, crossing herself. Marcus stumbled backward, disbelief painted across his weathered face. But his eyes, those soldiers' eyes, stayed locked on the man inside the coffin. That wasn't a vision. That wasn't a memory. That was Gabriel, alive. Shadow let out a sharp bark, tail thrashing, nails scraping against the base of the casket as he moved in close ears pinned back, eyes wide, whimpering. Gabriel blinked once, then again. His lips parted. But all that escaped was a hoarse whisper of breath, like wind through a broken reed. "Help!" The crowd burst into motion. Some cried out. Others backed away, clutching their coats and each other as if trying to hold on to reality that had just slipped sideways. Cell phones were pulled out. Someone began calling emergency services. A few people just stared, stunned into silence, unable to look away from the man they had just been mourning. The priest dropped his Bible. "Is this some kind of nightmare?" he murmured aloud. Marcus snapped out of it, climbed onto the platform, and knelt beside the coffin. "Gabriel, it's me. Marcus, don't move. We've got you." Gabriel's eyes fluttered toward the sound, recognition flickering through the haze. They tried," he rasped, but the words failed him. Shadow let out another soft bark, tail wagging anxiously. He pressed his snout against Gabriel's shoulder, nuzzling like a soldier reunited with his long-lost comrade. Gabriel didn't flinch. Even in his weakness, especially in his weakness, he trusted Shadow. "Get an ambulance here now," Marcus barked over his shoulder. "He's alive! He's alive!" From the crowd, a man pushed through with practiced urgency. "Doctor." Henry Rayan, the town's general physician, still in his blazer and tie, hurried up the platform. "I'm a doctor. Let me through," he said. Ryan knelt beside the casket, checked Gabriel's pulse, then his breathing, his pupils. Marcus watched every move, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. "Well," he demanded. Dr. Rayan hesitated a beat too long. This is highly irregular," he said. "It could be a form of catalepsy, extremely rare, a state where the body mimics death pulse drops, breathing slows to imperceptible levels. It's a medical fluke." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "You examined him, didn't you?" Rayan didn't answer directly. "We need to get him to the hospital, now!" Shadow's ears flattened. He turned slowly from Gabriel and fixed his gaze on someone in the crowd. Jonathan Kessler. The funeral director stood off to the side, arms folded too tightly, jaw rigid, He was sweating, not just the nervous kind, the cornered animal kind. Shadow growled. Not a bark, not a snarl. A low, sustained growl that started deep in the chest and rumbled outward like thunder through granite. Marcus turned his head slowly, following Shadow's line of sight. Kessler shifted but didn't move. "You signed off on the funeral without autopsy," Marcus said, voice low and sharp. Kessler shrugged, feigning composure. "It was sudden cardiac arrest. Dr. Rayan confirmed it. Military record. No surviving next of kin. The state allows expedited burial in such cases. I was just following protocol." Shadow growled louder. The people began to murmur. "Too fast," someone whispered. "He was fine a week ago." "Didn't even look sick." Dr. Rayan stood, brushing imaginary dust from his knees. "This isn't the time for accusations. We should focus on stabilizing the patient." "But this isn't normal," Marcus said. "None of this is." His eyes locked on Kessler, whose knuckles were white now. "You've run this funeral home for 20 years, Marcus continued. "Tell me something, Kessler. How many other flukes like this have you buried?" That landed like a slap. Kessler didn't answer, just looked away toward the far tree line where the sun tried and failed to pierce the clouds. Shadow barked, short, sharp. Gabriel, barely conscious, stirred in the casket. Marcus turned back to him, kneeling once more. "We've got you now, old friend. You're going to be okay." Gabriel's lips moved, barely audible. "Don't trust." Then he passed out. The ambulance arrived moments later, its sirens slicing through the shaken quiet like a final alarm bell. EMTs rushed forward, gently lifting Gabriel onto a stretcher. Shadow followed, refusing to be parted from him even as they loaded the gurney into the back. One of the EMTs started to close the door, but Marcus stepped in. "Let him ride with him," he said firmly, nodding at Shadow. The EMT hesitated, then relented. Shadow jumped into the ambulance without waiting for permission and took his place beside Gabriel's, hand guarding it, protecting it, believing it. As the ambulance pulled away, Marcus turned back to the cemetery. Dozens of faces were pale and wide-eyed. The sky remained overcast. But now there was something heavier than grief in the air. Suspicion. Shadow had done more than save a life. He had awakened a secret the town didn't know it was keeping. And somewhere in that cemetery, Marcus was sure, the truth had just begun to stir from beneath the surface. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above room 214, casting a cold, sterile glow across the floor. Outside, nurses moved quietly, their shoes barely squeaking against the linoleum. Monitors beeped at a steady rhythm proof of life where, just hours earlier, none was believed to remain. Gabriel Moreno lay motionless on the hospital bed, wrapped in a tangle of wires, IV lines snaking from his arms. His chest rose and fell, shallow but rhythmic. Oxygen hissed from the cannula in his nose. His skin was pale, his lips cracked, but there was color in his cheeks now, faint and hard-won. At his side, unmoving except to blink or shift his ears, was Shadow. The German shepherd sat like a sentinel, not resting, not sleeping, watching. His body was stiff with attention, his front paws planted just inches from Gabriel's hand. He hadn't left that spot since the ambulance stopped. Not for water, not for food. Not even when the nurse tried to lead him out of the room. Shadow had growled, quiet, controlled, final. They didn't try again. Marcus stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a paper cup of black coffee cooling untouched in his hand. His eyes hadn't left the bed in the past 45 minutes. He kept replaying it all. The casket, the knocking, the clawing, the fingers, the truth clawing its way back from beneath the dirt. He didn't know what had been done to his friend, but he knew this. Men like Gabriel didn't just fall asleep and die, not without a reason, and certainly not without a fight. Suddenly, Gabriel stirred. It was slight, a twitch of the neck, a flutter of eyelids, but enough to bring Marcus to the edge of the bed. "Gabe?" he said softly, leaning in. Shadow perked up immediately, tail wagging once before stilling again. Gabriel's lips moved, dry and slow. Marcus leaned closer. "I'm here. You're safe." Gabriel blinked against the harsh light above. His voice cracked like sandpaper dragged across stone. "They tried to erase me." Marcus's chest tightened. "Who, Gabe?" Gabriel's gaze drifted sideways, locking onto Shadow for a moment. The dog made a soft sound in his throat, something between a whine and a sigh, and nudged his nose into Gabriel's palm. A ghost of a smile touched Gabriel's mouth. "You found me?" he whispered. "You always do." Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, his tone firm but quiet. "What happened?" Gabriel blinked slowly. It started after Ryan came by." "Ryan?" Marcus stiffened. "Dr. Ryan?" Gabriel nodded, barely. "Said he needed to run routine tests. Said the VA flagged something in my last blood work. Nothing major." Marcus leaned back, jaw clenching. He had heard those words before, in base clinics, in field tents. It was always nothing major, until someone ended up zipped in a bag. Gabriel closed his eyes, as if dredging up the memory took more energy than he had. He gave me something, said it was a vitamin booster. For the fatigue. I felt dizzy after he left. Sat down in the kitchen. Shadow kept barking. Wouldn't stop barking. His voice caught, trembling. Then, nothing. Just black. Marcus's hands balled into fists on his knees. "And when you woke up," Gabriel's voice shrank to a whisper. "I couldn't move, couldn't speak, but I could feel. Here, they zipped me up. And I thought, this is it. This is how I go." A beat of silence passed. Only the monitor dared speak. Then Gabriel looked up, eyes moist. "If not for Shadow, I would have died in that box." Marcus swallowed the lump in his throat. His voice came out lower than he intended. "We're going to find out who did this. And why. I swear to you." Gabriel didn't answer. He just reached out, weak fingers brushing the fur at Shadow's neck. The shepherd leaned in, and for a moment, everything else in the room, machines, walls, dread fell away. It was just the two of them, soldier and dog, survivor and savior. There was a knock at the door. Marcus turned as a nurse stepped in, clipboard in hand. "Vitals are stabilizing, but he'll need time. Hydration, blood tests, neurological scans. We want to keep him under observation for at least 72 hours. Marcus nodded. "Understood." The nurse paused. "And the dog?" Shadow looked up at her. She hesitated. "He hasn't left." "He won't," Marcus said. "Let him stay." She didn't argue. As she left, Marcus turned back to Gabriel. "You rest. Don't worry about anything else. I've got this." Gabriel's eyes fluttered closed, lips parting with a soft breath. But in the dim quiet that followed, Marcus stared out the hospital window toward the horizon. Hazelwood had always felt like a safe town. peaceful, predictable, but something had slipped under that peace, a rot that smelled like antiseptic and polished mahogany and red-tape death certificates, and it had tried to bury one of their best, tried and failed, thanks to a dog who refused to mourn what wasn't gone yet. The funeral home looked different in daylight, less solemn, more sterile. The clean white siding and neatly trimmed hedges were designed to comfort grieving families, to whisper respectability, to hide what lay behind its closed doors. But to Marcus Hale, walking up the front steps with Shadow beside him, it looked more like a stage. And Jonathan Kessler? He was the man who knew the script too well. The front door creaked open with an automated chime. Cool air greeted them, tinged with floral spray and something faintly metallic, something hospitals and funeral homes shared when the cleaning didn't quite cover the truth. Kessler appeared almost immediately from behind a curtain near the office, wearing the same tailored gray suit he had worn at Gabriel's funeral. His tie was perfectly knotted, his face unreadable. "Marcus," he said, smoothing his lapels, "I didn't expect visitors." "I'm not a visitor," Marcus replied. "I've got questions." Shadow stayed at his heel but kept his head low, ears flicking with every movement in the room. His body wasn't tense but alert, too alert for a place meant for rest. Kessler's practiced smile didn't falter. "Of course. I'm happy to clarify anything. Please come in." He gestured toward a consultation room just off the main hall. The blinds were drawn, the lights dimmed. A low table sat between two upholstered chairs. It looked more like a therapist's office than a place where burial decisions were made. Marcus didn't sit. Shadow didn't move. Kessler folded his hands, standing. "I assume this is about Major Moreno?" Marcus nodded. "You signed off on a closed casket and expedited burial. No autopsy, no family delay, no questions. And now we know he was alive when you put him in that box." Kessler lifted an eyebrow. "I didn't put him in the box. That's a crude oversimplification." "You oversimplified his death," Marcus snapped. "I followed procedure," Kessler replied smoothly. "The death certificate was legally issued. Dr. Rayan confirmed it. There was no indication of foul play. Given Mr. Moreno's military status and lack of immediate family—" "He had me," Marcus cut in. "He had this dog. He had a name, a life, a record that should have bought him more than a 48-hour rush to the grave." A pause. Kessler's eyes briefly flicked to Shadow, who was now sniffing the corners of the room. "I understand how upsetting this must be," he said. "But I assure you nothing illegal occurred here. If there was a misdiagnosis, there's no if. He was buried alive." Kessler sighed, moving behind the desk as if putting furniture between them gave him more control. "All I can tell you," he said, "is that I received official documentation and followed it to the letter. I have nothing to hide." But Marcus wasn't looking at his face anymore. He was watching Shadow, who had suddenly veered toward the hallway. The dog stopped at a door half hidden at the end of the corridor. It was plain, painted the same beige as the wall, with no label, no windows. Shadow sniffed once, then growled. Marcus turned. "What's back there?" Kessler didn't answer immediately. "Storage," he said finally. "Mind opening it?" "I do, actually," Kessler said, voice suddenly firmer. "That's a private area used for staff supplies, equipment, and chemical storage. It's not safe for visitors, or animals." Shadow barked, sharp and sudden. He pawed at the base of the door, then looked back at Marcus with a low whine in his throat. "That dog's behavior has been erratic since the funeral," Kessler added, lips thin. "Perhaps some trauma, understandable." He's a military K9, Marcus said. He doesn't bark at shadows. He barks at lies. Kessler narrowed his eyes. Do you have a warrant, Mr. Hale? No, Marcus replied evenly. But if I come back with one and find something, you won't be able to explain it away with scented candles and vague protocols. Kessler leaned forward, fingers steepled. This is a place for grief and closure, not conspiracy theories. I'd advise you to be careful with your accusations. Words like buried alive can spread quickly in a small town. Good, Marcus said. Let them. He stepped toward the door, reaching out. Touch that door and I'll have you removed, Kessler snapped. Shadow growled again, louder this time. His hackles rose. Marcus held up a hand, not to Kessler, but to calm the dog. He met the man's eyes. You signed something that nearly killed my friend. Either you were incompetent or you were in on it. I'm giving you the chance to choose which story gets told. Kessler didn't blink, didn't flinch, but he didn't answer either. Instead, he turned away, opening a file drawer, pretending the conversation was over. Marcus turned to leave, but his voice echoed back over his shoulder. One more thing, he said. Gabriel remembers. That made Kessler stop mid-motion. And if you're smart, Marcus continued, you'll pray he forgets before the whole damn town remembers, too. He opened the door, and Shadow followed tail low, eyes still locked on that beige, unmarked door until the very last step. They didn't find answers that day, but they found something far more dangerous. They found where the questions began. The carpenter's workshop sat just outside the town square, tucked behind the general store, half obscured by a line of juniper trees and the fading red of an old fire hydrant. It smelled of cedar, varnish, and sawdust, comforting smells, honest ones, the kind that didn't lie. Marcus knocked twice on the wooden frame before easing the door open. The little brass bell above the entrance gave a soft jingle. Inside, Louis Tanner stood hunched over a half-sanded table leg, his broad shoulders moving in steady rhythm. He didn't turn around. I figured you'd show up, he said, voice gravelly from years of working without masks. Just didn't know how soon. Marcus stepped in, letting the door shut behind him. Shadow followed silently, tail low, gaze scanning the room. Louis finally turned. His eyes were bloodshot. There were dark stains on his apron varnish, maybe. Maybe something else. Marcus got straight to the point. You were the one who pried open Gabriel's coffin. Louis gave a slow nod. I was. You saw what was inside. You saw what he looked like, barely breathing, fighting, not dead. Louis leaned against the workbench, arms crossed tight. I haven't slept since. There was a pause, heavy and unspoken. I need you to tell me what you saw before that, Marcus said. The day you sealed the casket. Did anything seem off? Louis looked at the floor for a long time before answering. I've been doing this work for 15 years, he said slowly. I don't handle the bodies, I just build, repair, prep, caskets, display stands, storage crates when needed. I don't ask questions. But? Marcus asked. But that day felt wrong the moment I walked into the prep room. Louis scratched at a scar on his arm, then wiped his hands on a cloth that was already stained with more than it could hold. They told me to rush. Said the family insisted on a fast burial. No viewing, no open casket. There is no immediate family, Marcus said. Exactly. Louis looked up, his eyes rimmed with something between guilt and fear. That's what started ringing alarm bells in my head. But what could I do? Kessler was breathing down my neck, told me the state approved it, that it was confidential. Military security. he said. Marcus frowned. Military? Lewis nodded. Claimed the major had been involved in off-the-record missions, that the government didn't want the body exposed for security reasons, said it could compromise something. Marcus felt his stomach turn. The lie was layered, tidy, designed to keep just enough people quiet. What else? He pressed. Lewis hesitated, then reached under his workbench and pulled out a rolled-up blueprint of a custom casket build. I didn't ask about this either, he muttered, unrolling it. But this wasn't my usual order. No lining, no embalming port, pre-sealed shell. That's not protocol for any burial, military or not. Marcus leaned over the blueprint. The specs looked more like something built to hide a body, not honor one. Lewis glanced at Shadow, who had sat down now, his ears still angled toward the man as if listening, judging. There's more, Lewis said, voice dropping. I saw Dr. Rayan come in, that morning. To the funeral home? Lewis nodded. He came through the back, carrying 2 black medical bags. Heavy. I know that because I helped him lift one when it almost fell. When I asked where the mortician was, he said not to worry. The body had already been handled. Marcus froze. But there was no mortician assigned to Gabriel's prep. I know. And no embalming report. Lewis looked sick. I didn't realize it at the time, just figured maybe things were handled somewhere else. I told myself it was above my pay grade. Marcus paced in a slow circle, the wheels turning. They never intended for anyone to see the body again. No family, no viewing, no embalming, just a box in the ground, quick and clean. Except Shadow didn't let it be clean, Lewis said. Marcus turned back toward him. Why tell me now? Lewis's jaw clenched. Because I saw his hand. His hand, Marcus. Reaching out from under that lid like a man clawing out of his own grave. I can't unsee that. And I helped seal it shut. You didn't know, Marcus said quietly. But I know now. There was a silence between them. Thick, real, unadorned. Shadow stood and walked over to Lewis, pressing his head gently against the man's leg. Lewis let out a shuddering breath. I want to do the right thing. Marcus nodded. Then I need you to go on record, with everything. The casket, Rayan, the rushed timeline, the fake orders. Lewis looked at him, and for a second, Marcus wasn't sure the man would agree. But then he gave a slow, tired nod. I'll talk. Just promise me something. What? If I disappear or slip and hit my head in my own shop, don't let them call it an accident. Marcus's eyes turned hard. If they come for you, they'll have to go through me. And him. He nodded toward Shadow. The dog looked up, eyes sharp and steady. The hospital room was quiet. Too quiet for a dog who had lived most of his life amid chaos. Shadow lay curled near the foot of Gabriel's bed, his breathing slow, ears flicking only when the machines beeped out of rhythm. Outside, nurses passed, clipboards clacked, fluorescent lights buzzed. But in here, for a moment, everything paused. And in that stillness, Shadow remembered. The heat came first, not the gentle warmth of a summer day, but the searing, dry-boned scorch of Afghanistan. The air carried sand and diesel fumes, and every shadow stretched too far, like it was trying to run. Shadow moved with precision down the narrow alley of a bombed-out village, Gabriel at his side. The man's voice had been steady in his ear. Easy, boy. Check left. Good. That's it. His paws made no sound on the hot earth, but his nose caught its chemical trace just beneath the rubble, a whiff of copper, plastic, wrongness. He stopped. One sharp bark. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He signaled, waved the others back, then dropped to one knee beside Shadow and whispered, "Where?" Shadow pawed once at a buried panel beneath a cloth. And then they knew. An IED wired to a door, waiting for a child's hand or a soldier's boot. One step off, someone would have died. But not that day, because Shadow found it first. In the field, Shadow had worn a vest marked K968A. No name, just a code, just another tool. But Gabriel never called him by that. He called him partner. Or sometimes when no one else was around, he whispered Shadow, because that's what he was. Always there, always behind him, beside him, silent, watching, moving like a second soul tied to his own. Their bond wasn't trained. It was earned, sweat-soaked, blood-earned, built between ambushes and night patrols and shared wounds no one else could see. Another memory flickered. A firefight. The kind where sound disappeared into ringing, where bullets ripped the sky open and dirt exploded around them like thunder from below. Gabriel was hit. Shadow didn't hesitate. He ran straight through the crossfire, dodging muzzle flashes and the smell of iron, until he reached his handler and dragged him by the vest back behind cover. The scar on his left flank, still faint under his fur, was from that day. A grazing round. He hadn't yelped, hadn't limped, just kept moving. Later that night, Gabriel had stitched the wound himself. No vet, no morphine, just two soldiers, one on two legs, one on four, trying to survive another day. "You saved my life again," Gabriel whispered, blood on his hands. "Damn it, Shadow. We're going to make it out. You hear me? You're getting a backyard after this. A real one." Shadow had pressed his head against Gabriel's chest, listening to the heartbeat he'd dragged out of death. He believed him. Another time, a child barefoot crying, running toward a convoy in the mountains. Shadow lunged ahead, not to attack, to protect, because he'd seen what Gabriel hadn't. The man in the second-story window, the trigger in his hand, the red light blinking beneath the dirt path where the child's feet had been headed. Shadow barked once, and Gabriel shouted, "Down!" The convoy halted. The child lived. The bomb didn't detonate because Shadow stopped it first. That night they didn't eat rations. Someone gave Shadow a piece of beef jerky from home. He took it gently from Gabriel's hand and then curled up beside him in the sand, eyes scanning the darkness for ghosts. Back in the hospital room, Shadow shifted. His ears twitched at the sound of Gabriel's breathing. Still there, still faint, but there. The present returned like a tide, slow but rising. This wasn't the battlefield. There were no mortars or gunfire now. No drones overhead, no commands screamed over radio static. Just Gabriel. Just him. Just the silence between heartbeats and the soft beeping of a machine that dared to think it could replace instinct. Shadow lifted his head and placed it gently on the edge of the bed. His nose touched the blanket near Gabriel's arm. A soft sigh escaped his throat. He had followed Gabriel into war zones, into fire, into rubble and ruin and things no one wrote home about. And now he had followed him back from a coffin. Because that's what you do when someone isn't just your handler. They're your other half. They're your reason. The door creaked open gently. But Shadow didn't move. Marcus stepped in, carrying a paper bag and a bottle of water. He stopped short when he saw the dog's posture rigid, locked onto Gabriel like he was guarding something sacred. He lowered his voice. "Still watching him, huh?" Shadow didn't respond. He didn't need to. Marcus stepped closer, placing a quiet hand on the shepherd's back. "He's lucky to have you." The dog didn't turn, just closed his eyes for a moment, resting, but never sleeping. And somewhere behind those eyes were memories carved deeper than scars, because Shadow had been trained to detect threats. But it was something else. Something older that had told him Gabriel wasn't dead. It was loyalty. It was instinct. It was love, forged in sand and steel, in broken ribs and heartbeat silence. And now, it was purpose. He hadn't failed Gabriel in war. He sure as hell wasn't going to fail him now. The air changed the moment he walked in. It was subtle, nothing visible, no shift in light, no sudden noise, just a scent. And Shadow caught it before anyone else. He was lying beside Gabriel's bed, head resting against the man's forearm, when his nose twitched sharply. In a blink, his ears shot up. His body tensed. One paw moved forward. Then the growl began, low, vibrating, primal. Marcus, seated in the corner with a worn paperback half open in his lap, looked up instantly. "What is it, boy?" But Shadow wasn't looking at him. He was staring past the door. Seconds later, it opened, and Dr. Henry Rayan stepped into the room, clipboard in hand, a practiced smile on his face. "How's our patient today?" he said, tone light, pleasant, too pleasant. Shadow stood. The growl deepened. Dr. Rayan hesitated mid-step. Marcus rose to his feet slowly, eyes narrowing. "He doesn't usually do that." "Dogs react to stress environments," Rayan said with a chuckle, keeping his distance, "especially if their handler's unwell." Shadow barked once, loud, sharp. Then again, this time louder. He stepped in front of the bed, placing himself between Gabriel and the doctor like a wall of fur and fury. "Easy," Marcus said, trying to calm him. But Shadow wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on Rayan, unblinking, ears pinned back, teeth just barely bared. Gabriel stirred under the blankets. "What's going on?" he rasped. Marcus leaned over him. "It's okay. Rayan came in to check on you." Gabriel's breath caught. His fingers clutched the sheet. "Rayan?" he whispered. Marcus nodded. Gabriel's eyes went wide with something colder than fear. "No." Rayan took a step forward. "Major Moreno, I'm glad to see you awake. I'm just here for some routine post-trauma assessment." Shadow lunged. He didn't bite, but he jumped forward, teeth flashing, barking with such ferocity that Rayan stumbled backward and slammed into the wall. "Call him off!" Rayan barked. "This is unacceptable!" Gabriel's voice was hoarse but sharp. "Don't move." Everyone froze. Shadow stood stiff-legged, planted like stone, chest heaving, growl constant. Gabriel turned his head toward Marcus. "He knows." Marcus crouched beside him. "What do you mean?" Gabriel's voice was quiet, but each word hit like a nail in a coffin. "He was the last one to visit me. Said there was something in my blood work. Wanted to boost my immunity. Told me not to tell anyone. Said it was part of a new VA trial." Marcus's heart dropped. Gabriel's hand trembled against the sheets. "He gave me an injection. 5 minutes later, I collapsed. Couldn't move. Couldn't speak. But I was still there, Marcus. Still inside my body, trapped." Rayan's face paled. "That's a serious accusation," he said quickly. "You were already in declining health. Perhaps you confused—" "I was healthy," Gabriel rasped. "I hiked 2 days before, played fetch with Shadow. I was fine." Shadow's growling grew louder again, like every word validated what he already knew through instinct. "You tried to erase me," Gabriel whispered, eyes fixed on Rayen. "But he didn't let you." Rayen turned to Marcus, voice brittle. "This is nonsense. He's confused, delirious. This is a side effect of trauma." "Get out," Marcus said quietly. Rayen blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said get the hell out of this room. Before I forget, I'm not in uniform anymore." Rayen opened his mouth to object, but one look at Shadow, still stiff, still watching, changed his mind. He backed out of the room quickly, nearly tripping over the doorframe. The moment he disappeared, Shadow stepped back toward Gabriel and lay down again, head on the man's chest like nothing had happened. Marcus sat down slowly. Neither spoke for a moment. Then Gabriel, staring at the ceiling, whispered, "They were going to bury me alive." Marcus clenched his jaw. "Yeah, they almost did." "But they didn't," Marcus said. "You've got a witness, me, the dog, and now we've got motive." Gabriel's breath caught in his throat. Why would a doctor do something like that? For what? Marcus didn't answer, but in his mind, pieces were moving too fast, too dark. The sealed casket, the no autopsy order, Rayen's sudden involvement, Kessler's evasiveness, a system that tried to disappear someone without leaving a trace. Whatever it was, it went deeper than bad paperwork, and the only reason they were having this conversation was because Shadow refused to believe Gabriel was gone. Marcus looked down at the dog, who was now watching the door with the eyes of a soldier. "I think he smells more than lies," Marcus muttered. "I think he smells fear." It started with a folder. Manila creased at the corners, half forgotten on a shelf at the Hazelwood Medical Records office. Marcus sat hunched in a back room that smelled like old carpet and toner ink, fluorescent lights flickering above him. His military ID had opened a few quiet doors, enough to get him 30 minutes alone with Gabriel's VA files and civilian health logs. It wasn't legal, but it was necessary. He opened the file, bracing for what might lie between the pages. Instead, he found nothing. Gabriel's last 3 checkups. Clean. Blood pressure, stable. Cardio scans, excellent. No red flags, no autoimmune issues, no prescriptions outside the usual vitamins. The last entry was routine blood work, flagged as normal by the VA clinic and signed off by Dr. Henry Rayen himself. No follow-up request, no anomaly, no immunity booster, no justification for the visit that nearly turned Gabriel into a ghost. Marcus's fingers tightened around the folder. He'd suspected something. Now it felt like confirmation. He wasn't looking at bad paperwork. He was looking at intentional omission. He stood, slid the folder into his jacket, and walked out of the building without a word. Hazelwood was quiet that afternoon, one of those false peace days where the sun tried to pretend nothing had ever gone wrong. Kids on bikes, flags on porches, the kind of town that convinced you nothing dark could grow here. But Marcus knew better. He drove straight to Hazelwood General, parked, and headed through the side entrance to the physician's wing. Shadow was with him, silent and coiled, every step measured. A leash dangled loosely from Marcus's hand, but they both knew it was more symbolic than functional. Dr. Rayen was just finishing a conversation with a nurse when he saw them. He froze. Marcus didn't wait for pleasantries. "We need to talk," he said. Rayan's smile barely held. "I'm afraid I'm on my way to a consult." "I'm afraid you're not." Rayan glanced at Shadow, who stared back, unmoving, tail low, gaze sharp. The doctor shifted. "If this is about Major Moreno—" "It is," Marcus said, stepping forward. "I reviewed his health file. No issues. Not a single abnormality in his blood work. Yet you showed up at his house, alone, unannounced, and gave him an injection that nearly buried him alive." "That's absurd," Rayan said, voice tight. "You're twisting events." "Am I?" Marcus reached into his jacket and tossed a folded sheet of paper onto the counter beside them. Rayan flinched at the sight. "Signed by you," Marcus said. "No orders. No explanation. No follow-up. You ghosted the system after drugging a healthy man." Rayan straightened his shoulders, eyes narrowing. "You're not a lawyer, Mr. Hale. You're not law enforcement. You're just a friend with a badge that expired a long time ago." Shadow growled, quiet, controlled, but it shut the hallway down to silence. Rayan's voice dropped. "I suggest you leave before I file a harassment report." "You do that," Marcus said, stepping closer. "And I'll show the sheriff your name on this report, and ask him how many other patients you visited alone. How many caskets went into the ground without family." Rayan's expression faltered. Just a flicker. "Enough." Marcus leaned in. "Gabriel remembers your voice. He remembers your hands. He remembers not being able to move while you zipped him into death." "That's not possible." "But it happened," Marcus cut in. "And your name is on every step of it." Rayan didn't reply. Shadow's growl deepened. Marcus stared him down one last time. "You buried the wrong man." Then he turned and walked away, Shadow at his side. Behind them, Rayan didn't follow. But his silence clung to Marcus like a stain he couldn't scrub off. Back at the hospital, Marcus returned to Gabriel's room and stood quietly by the window. Shadow immediately returned to his post near the bed, settling in like a soldier on watch. Gabriel opened his eyes slowly. "Did you find anything?" he rasped. Marcus nodded. "I found enough." Gabriel took a breath, shaky but stronger than before. "He said it was a vaccine. That's what he called it." Marcus sat beside him. "It wasn't. It was something that shut your body down, slowed your heart, faked your death, like you were meant to disappear." Gabriel didn't speak for a long moment. Then finally, "Why me?" Marcus didn't have the answer. Not yet. But the lies were crumbling. The mask was slipping. And the man who tried to erase a war hero had just looked into the eyes of a dog who never forgot his scent. Shadow lay still, one ear up, tracking every footstep outside the door. This wasn't over. Not even close. The key didn't look like much, just a dull brass curve on a bent ring, old teeth worn down from use. But when Lewis handed it to Marcus in the parking lot behind the funeral home, his fingers trembled. "This opens the lower-level access door," Lewis whispered. "Not the main one. This is older, before they upgraded security." Marcus nodded once. No time for questions, just time for answers. Shadow stood by the passenger door of the truck, eyes fixed on the dark building ahead. His body was tense but still, like a coiled spring waiting for the right signal. He didn't need training to know something was wrong here. He could smell it. They waited until the streetlights flickered past midnight, when Hazelwood dozed under the illusion of safety, and then moved. The funeral home loomed in silence. A colonial shell repainted and landscaped into politeness, its white shutters closed like eyelids trying to forget. Marcus approached the side gate, Shadow trailing behind him like a ghost on 4 legs. The gate creaked once, then gave way. The door Lewis mentioned was nearly hidden by the ivy-choked wall behind the maintenance alley. Marcus slid the key into the lock and paused, listening. Only the wind. He turned it. The click sounded louder than it should have. He pushed the door open and was greeted by pitch darkness and a blast of cold, sterile air. It didn't smell like dust or damp. It smelled like ammonia, like bleach, like something was being erased down here. Shadow growled. They stepped inside. The flashlight beam cut through the dark like a scalpel, revealing narrow steps leading underground. Each creak echoed, bouncing off concrete walls like whispers chasing them. At the bottom, a corridor opened to the left bare pipes along the ceiling, condensation dripping in rhythmic beats. The flashlight caught rows of metal doors. Most were ajar, but one at the end stood shut and padlocked. Marcus approached it carefully. The closer he got, the more the smell thickened, chemical. Clean, but wrong. Not decay, not time. Control, sterilization. Shadow's body pressed low to the floor, nose twitching furiously, tail down. He let out a low, warning growl that deepened with each step. Marcus reached the door. No keyhole this time, just a rusting padlock bolted into the frame. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a pry bar he'd stashed before leaving home. 2 hard strikes. A third. Metal groaned and then gave. The lock dropped to the floor with a dead clang. He opened the door. The smell hit him like a slap. Not death, not yet, but the preparation for it. Inside was a small prep room, no wider than a storage unit. Tiled floor, metal counters, industrial sink, cabinets overhead. But it wasn't the equipment that made Marcus freeze. It was the gleaming racks of sealed medical containers lining the left wall. Not funeral tools, not embalming supplies. Medical bags, IVs, vials, labeled syringes, sterile gloves in neat piles, and on a small steel tray, an empty vial with a worn sticker that read, "Adrenaline suppressant, batch RX-47. Marcus's blood turned to ice. Shadow barked once, sharp, loud, startling even Marcus. The dog lunged toward the far corner, nose pressed to a door nearly flush with the back wall. "What is it?" Marcus whispered, following his lead. The door was thinner metal, not wood. Behind it, something scraped. No, someone. A faint, shuffling sound. Marcus held his breath, but before he could react, a sudden noise echoed from the stairwell behind them. Footsteps, heavy, rushed. Shadow snapped his head around, growling deep. Marcus turned off the flashlight. Too late. The beam of another light flared from behind the staircase. "Hey! Who's down there?" It wasn't Lewis. 2 shadows descended, one tall, one broad, voices sharp with authority. "This area's restricted." Marcus backed into the prep room, barely whispering, "Stay behind me." But Shadow didn't. As the 2 figures stepped into the hallway, one reaching for a baton, Shadow lunged forward with a snarl that ricocheted off the walls. The first man yelped, stumbling backward. The second raised a taser, but Marcus tackled him before it could be fired, shoving him into the wall. Shadow pinned the first man to the floor, teeth clamped just below the shoulder. Not biting warning. The man screamed, writhing. "Call him off! Get him off!" Marcus yanked his phone from his pocket and hit record, camera facing the prep room. He spoke calmly but loudly. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm inside Kessler Funeral Home's restricted basement where medical materials not approved for mortuary use are being stored. No warrant, no explanation, no oversight. And now I'm being assaulted by two unidentified men with no badges. He focused the lens on the broken lock, the vials, the tray, then turned it on the faces of the two men. One of them spat. "You don't know what you're getting into." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "Yeah, I'm starting to." They didn't stay long. Marcus and Shadow slipped out the way they came, leaving behind a hallway of groaning men and the undeniable weight of something bigger than a mistake. Outside, the sky had begun to lighten into gray. Shadow trotted ahead, tongue low, his gait limping just slightly from the encounter, but proud. Marcus looked down at his hand. The vial's photo was still on his phone. Clear label, clear evidence. But more than that, he had something deeper. He had a feeling that this wasn't about one death, it was about erasure, sanitized, buried, hidden, and now they had the key to the next door. Shadow lifted his head, ears perked, as if he already knew where they were headed next. The hallway narrowed as Marcus moved deeper into the lower level of the funeral home, flashlight beams slicing through dust motes that refused to settle. Behind him, Shadow's paws padded silently over the concrete floor low, alert, every muscle tuned to something Marcus couldn't yet see. But the dog already sensed. The corridor turned sharply, left dead-ending, into a second steel door, this one bolted with an old-fashioned sliding latch. No electronic lock, just old hardware and newer secrets. Marcus hesitated, fingers resting on the bolt. Shadow growled softly behind him. With a breath, Marcus slid the latch open. The door groaned inward, and the stench hit like a body blow. Not decay exactly, but something deeper. Wrongness. The air was cold, not from lack of ventilation, but from deliberate refrigeration, the kind meant to preserve, to delay rot, to keep something viable. Shadow stopped just outside the threshold, tail rigid, head lowered, his nose wrinkling at the chemical cocktail saturating the room. Formaldehyde, ethanol, something else metallic, sharp, clean in the most clinical, unholy way. Marcus stepped inside. Rows of long drawers lined the walls, and in the center of the room 6 gurneys. Not the kind for showings or gentle send-offs. These were morgue standard, fitted with drainage slats and steel restraints. 3 of them were occupied. Body bags, zipped, tagged. Marcus's chest tightened as he approached. The first tag read, Reynolds, D, no kin, DOA 0311. He frowned. The name meant nothing, but something about it stuck. He unzipped the bag halfway. Inside lay a man in his 50s, pale, lips slightly parted. No sign of trauma, no autopsy incisions, no stitching, just frozen stillness. Marcus re-zipped it, moved to the next. This tag said, Unnamed, Case 72B, Hold for Transfer. No date, no kin, no identifying marker, just a number. The zipper caught for a second as he opened it. Inside, a woman, maybe early 30s. Her arms bore faded track marks, not from drug use, Marcus noted, but from repeated needle entry points. Hospital grade, clinical. He stared. The third gurney was different. The body inside had been cut, not in a Y incision like standard autopsy procedures, but a long, deep slash down the side clean, practiced. surgical. Marcus's stomach turned as he leaned in closer. There were stitches, but something was missing. Organs. The cavity was partially empty space where a kidney should have been. Possibly more. The blood had been cleaned, the skin resealed. It was a cover-up, not a reportable examination. A corpse turned product. A person turned inventory. Marcus stepped back, hand trembling slightly. His military training told him to compartmentalize, to breathe, to stay rational. But his gut told him something older, more primal. This place was never meant to bury the dead. It was built to harvest the living. Shadow whined low, pacing at the door. He didn't want to come closer, and Marcus didn't blame him. At the far end of the room, a metal cabinet stood slightly ajar. Inside were folders. Marcus opened one. Extraction protocol, priority blood types. AB, O, RH null, flag for expedited isolation. The next page listed donors. Some names had been crossed out. Others had barcodes. A few had Gabriel's birth year, and one had his name. Gabriel Moreno, entry code 1730R. Confirmed viable. Prep complete. Schedule 0402, expedited pickup. Marcus's throat went dry. They hadn't just targeted Gabriel for his silence. They'd wanted what was inside him. Shadow barked sharply behind him. Marcus spun and realized the hallway light had flickered on. Someone was coming. He shoved the folder into his jacket, zipped it up, and turned to the body bags. But something stopped him. He stepped back to the third body, placed his hand gently on the woman's stitched arm. "I'm sorry," he murmured. Not for what he found, but for how long no one had been looking. Then he turned and ran. Up the corridor, Shadow led the way, each paw step swift but silent, tail low to the ground. As they cleared the main corridor, the stairwell came into view, but so did a voice from above. "You were told to leave this area sealed." Marcus ducked into the shadows, heart racing. Another voice, sharper, colder. "We don't have time for cleanup. They're getting too close." Marcus hit record on his phone audio only. Footsteps neared the stairwell. Marcus held Shadow close against the wall, body tense. They waited, breath shallow. The voices moved on. And Marcus knew they weren't just hiding bodies. They were preparing shipments. That wasn't a morgue. It was a warehouse. Back outside, as the stars faded into gray and early birds began to sing over Hazelwood rooftops, Marcus sat in his truck, engine off. Shadow curled in the back seat, watchful, but no longer growling. On the dashboard sat Marcus's phone screen lit, voice memo saved. He stared at the building behind them. Kessler Funeral Home, a place meant to bring closure. But what they'd uncovered inside, that was only the beginning. Marcus barely had time to slam the prep room door shut when footsteps echoed up the corridor, a trio of hard-soled shoes against the concrete, synchronized, like a drumbeat of dread. Shadow tensed beside him, ears pinned, body low to the ground, hackles raised. From the far end of the hall, a flashlight snapped on. Then a voice. "Going somewhere, Mr. Hale?" Jonathan Kessler stepped into view, his tailored suit pristine even in the basement's dim lighting. His hands were folded calmly in front of him, as if he were about to lead a tour of the facility rather than confront an intruder. On either side of him stood two men, larger, broader, both wearing dark jackets, each with a faint bulge beneath the lapel that Marcus didn't need to guess at. Security, not official, not local PD, private muscle. Marcus kept his voice steady. Place sure is quiet for a funeral home. Kessler smiled without humor. Some of us are night owls. We get things done when others sleep. Shadow let out a guttural growl. One of the men shifted his weight uneasily. Kessler tilted his head, feigning concern. Was something unclear in our last conversation? This area is restricted to staff. For safety reasons. Safety? Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, not for a weapon, but for his phone. He tapped the video button with his thumb. The screen blinked red. Recording. I've seen your storage, Jonathan. The one with the body bags. The unautopsied corpses. The woman with missing organs. You want to explain that? Kessler's smile didn't fade. You're mistaken. Those are routine transfers. Not every death warrants invasive procedures, especially when next of kin waive it. And the cold storage containers? Marcus added. The vial marked adrenaline suppressant? The shipping logs? That's none of your concern. It is now. Marcus angled the phone to catch Kessler's face. You're on record. I'm sure a judge will find your routine transfers very interesting. One of the guards stepped forward. Turn off the phone. Shadow bared his teeth, lips peeled back in a silent snarl. The low, vibrating sound that followed was the kind that settled in your bones. Easy, Kessler said, raising a hand. But his eyes never left Marcus's phone. You don't know what you're playing with. You think you've found something sinister in a few medical forms and embalming tools? You're chasing shadows. Marcus didn't blink. No, he's right here beside me. At that, Kessler's veneer cracked, just a flicker. The second guard moved, fast. He lunged at Marcus, arm swinging in a practiced arc, meant to knock the phone out of his hand. Marcus ducked, but didn't have to finish the move. Shadow shot forward like a coiled spring. His body collided with the man mid-stride, teeth sinking into the padded sleeve of his coat. The man shouted, twisting, slamming into the wall as Shadow yanked him down. The fabric tore. A clean rip and a chunk of the sleeve remained in Shadow's jaw. Marcus didn't hesitate. He turned and ran. Shadow followed, still gripping the fabric like a trophy. Behind them, Kessler's voice rang out, cold and furious. Stop them! But Marcus was already through the stairwell door, taking the steps two at a time. He burst through the side exit, breath ragged, heart pounding. Outside, the air was sharper, the dawn just beginning to bleed across the horizon. Shadow leapt into the passenger seat without command, still clutching the torn sleeve. Marcus slammed the door shut and fired up the engine. Gravel scattered beneath the tires as they peeled out of the lot. Only once they were several blocks away did he pull over. His hands shook as he tapped stop on the video recording. It had everything: Kessler's face, his denial, the confrontation, the guard's attack, and most important, Shadow's defensive response. The torn sleeve lay on the dash, now frayed, stained, the inner lining flecked with blood. DNA. Marcus exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. Then he looked to Shadow, who now sat calmly, ears forward, as if asking, "What's next?" Marcus stared out at the sleeping town of Hazelwood. They just made this personal. Back at his house, Marcus placed the sleeve in a Ziploc bag and put it in the freezer. Chain of custody. That was step one. Then he uploaded the video to a secure cloud folder, encrypted it, and sent a link to Sheriff Javier Cortez's subject line, "You need to see this." Shadow watched him the whole time. No barking, no pacing, just quiet understanding. Marcus sat beside him on the floor and laid a hand on the dog's head. "You didn't just protect me tonight," he whispered. "You made sure they wouldn't bury the truth again." Shadow's eyes blinked slowly, tired, but unwavering. It wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time, they had more than instinct. They had evidence. And the enemy had just shown its face. The sheriff's office in Hazelwood sat just off Main Street, an aging brick building with sun-faded paint and an old U.S. flag that cracked when the wind blew through. Most days the place was quiet. This morning it felt like a powder keg waiting for a match. Marcus pulled into the lot with Shadow in the passenger seat, the dog alert, eyes scanning the sidewalk like a soldier on patrol. He didn't whimper, didn't blink. The night had changed something in him, in both of them. Inside, the receptionist barely had time to announce their arrival before a voice cut through the doorway. "Let them in." Sheriff Javier Cortez stood in the frame, tall and composed, with graying temples and a stare sharpened by years of military command. His uniform was neat but understated, his belt worn more by habit than show. He looked at Marcus, then at Shadow. "You said it was urgent." "It is," Marcus replied, "and it's not just a hunch anymore." He handed over a flash drive, and Javier led them into his office, a space cluttered with half-finished reports, a folded American flag in a case, and a photo of a younger Javier in desert fatigues, hand resting on the head of a German shepherd wearing a canine badge. He plugged in the drive. The video played, grainy but damning. Kessler's voice, the confrontation, the storage room, and finally, the attack in Shadow's immediate, trained response. Javier sat in silence as it rolled. When it ended, he leaned back in his chair and ran a hand down his jaw. "Jesus," he muttered, "and this is just the basement." Marcus nodded. "There's more. A room with body bags, surgical incisions, a folder with Gabriel's name scheduled for extraction. They weren't burying him. They were prepping him." Javier exhaled slowly. "Organ trafficking in Hazelwood." "Yeah, under the roof of the town's most trusted mortician." Shadow growled low. His ears flicked toward the door, always alert. Javier looked at the dog, and for the first time since they entered, his expression softened. "Is this the K9 that pulled Gabriel out?" "His name's Shadow," Marcus said. "Retired, but still active in all the ways that matter." Javier stood, crossing to the window. Outside, the morning light fell over the quiet town square. Birds flitted between trees. Elderly folks gathered near the coffee shop. It looked normal, like nothing had shifted underneath them. But something had. "I'll open a discreet investigation," Javier said at last. "Off the books. No local backup unless I trust them personally. I want to verify what you've got. Check shipping manifests. Call in a forensic team quietly." He turned back to Marcus. "But once we go public, there's no halfway. Kessler's connected. If he sniffs this out before we're ready, he'll either bolt or burn it all." "I know," Marcus replied. "That's why I'm coming to you first. You trust me?" "I trust Shadow," Marcus said, "and he trusts you." It wasn't a line, it was the truth. Javier crouched, extending a hand slowly toward the dog. Shadow didn't flinch. He leaned forward, sniffed the man's hand, and then gently pressed his forehead against the sheriff's palm. That was all Javier needed. He stood. "Then we're in this together." By midday, word had begun to drift quietly through Hazelwood's cracks. Not full rumors yet, but shimmers. Hints. The dog from the cemetery, the one that saved Gabriel, was now helping the sheriff. People began to talk. Isabel Vega, whose brother vanished last spring after a routine outpatient visit, saw Shadow walking beside Javier through town square. She froze. Then she followed. 2 more families joined, then 4. By sundown, they weren't whispering anymore. They were watching. Kessler's funeral home, once seen as a place of quiet closure, now felt like a building under siege. Not by pitchforks or fire, but by something more dangerous. Truth. Inside his office that evening, Javier lit a desk lamp and opened an old case file, one from a decade ago. A man found dead from complications. No autopsy. Handled by Kessler. He'd always thought something felt off. Now, with Shadow curled at his feet and Marcus beside him, he finally saw the pattern. "We're going to need more than footage," he said. "We'll need testimony from Gabriel, from anyone else who's seen the inside." "I've got someone," Marcus replied. "The carpenter Lewis. He's nervous, but he knows what he saw." "And Shadow?" Javier glanced down. The dog lifted his head. "He's more than evidence," Marcus said. "He's a witness, and Hazelwood's starting to realize that." Javier leaned back. One town, one sheriff, one man who refused to let his best friend get buried alive, and one dog who wouldn't let the dead stay silent. The air inside Rosa's tap room felt heavier than usual that night, not with smoke or booze, but with a kind of collective pressure, like a town holding its breath. The low hum of conversation, glasses clinking, and country music from a forgotten radio in the corner filled the space. But beneath it all was a current of tension. Unspoken questions, looks exchanged, names whispered. At the far end of the bar, Marcus sat with a glass of water he hadn't touched. Beside him, Shadow lay quietly, head resting on his front paws, eyes scanning every movement like a sentry on duty. He was calm, but not relaxed. No one dared ask why the retired police dog was in the bar tonight. Everyone already knew. The screen above the bar flickered, then shifted. Local news. A pre-recorded interview. The reporter's voice was soft. "Major Gabriel Moreno has agreed to speak publicly for the first time since his near-death experience." The room fell silent. Gabriel's face appeared pale, lined with exhaustion but dignified, seated in his hospital bed. He wore a pressed shirt over the hospital gown, and his silver star pinned near the collar. Shadow stirred when he heard the voice, his ears twitching. "I know how it sounds," Gabriel said into the camera, "but I need people to listen. I wasn't dead. I was declared dead." A murmur rolled through the bar like wind through dry leaves. "They said it was a fluke, a rare medical anomaly," Gabriel continued. "But I know what happened. I remember the doctor who visited. I remember the dizziness. I remember blacking out and waking up inside a coffin." A woman's glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Still, Gabriel spoke. "I'm alive because my dog, my partner, knew better. Shadow didn't just save me. He exposed something darker, something we can't afford to ignore anymore. If this could happen to me, a decorated veteran, it could happen to anyone. So I'm saying this now as clearly as I can." He looked straight into the lens. "I wasn't dead, but they wanted me to be." At a corner booth near the window, Isabel Vega pressed a napkin to her mouth. She had come to the bar for a moment of distraction, to try to forget the silence in her brother's room, the birthday card he never picked up, the way the funeral home staff had rushed the cremation. But now, watching Gabriel's interview, the words clawed at her like broken glass. She stood up, her legs trembling. "He went in for a routine biopsy," she said aloud. Her voice cracked. "They said he had complications, that there was no need for an autopsy, just a signature." Everyone turned toward her. "My brother, Daniel, he never came home. He didn't even look sick." Marcus rose slowly from his seat, walking over. Shadow followed, silently, naturally. as if he already knew where he was needed. Isabel collapsed into the booth, covering her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook, grief rising from somewhere buried for too long. And then something unexpected. A soft weight pressed against her feet. She looked down. Shadow had settled at her side, curling gently against her legs. His head rested on the toe of her boot. No barking, no movement, just presence. Isabel let out a broken sob. "He was just 31, she whispered. "He loved bad jokes. He couldn't even eat spicy food without crying, and they took him like he didn't matter." Marcus sat beside her. "He mattered, and we're going to prove it." A silence settled over the room, not empty, but shared. A silence of witnesses. Outside the bar, the wind had picked up. People stepped onto the sidewalk one by one, like smoke drifting from a slow fire. No one said much. But everyone understood something had shifted. This wasn't just Gabriel's nightmare anymore. It was the town's. Inside the bar, the TV kept playing, footage of Shadow at the cemetery. The moment he lunged at the casket, the sound of his howl, the howl that shattered the silence. Later that night, Marcus stood beside Gabriel's hospital bed again. The lights were dimmed. A nurse had tried to usher Shadow out but gave up when the dog simply refused to move. Marcus handed Gabriel a printed copy of a local news article. "Veteran's dog may have uncovered illegal activity at funeral home." Gabriel read the headline, then looked up. "We're just getting started, aren't we?" Marcus nodded. "The town's watching now." Gabriel looked at Shadow. He always knew who to trust. Shadow, resting at the bedside, opened one eye. Outside the window, somewhere in the shadows of Hazelwood, something stirred uneasily. The predators in the dark had operated for years in silence. But now they were being hunted by a truth that growled, and a town that refused to bury its dead quietly. The office smelled faintly of strong coffee and unspoken tension. Sheriff Javier Cortez sat hunched over his desk, elbows resting beside a stack of statements, photographs, and evidence bags. Outside the window, dawn hadn't broken yet, just a bluish hush pressing against the glass. The kind of hour where decisions carried weight. He thumbed through one of the sworn statements again, this one from a name he hadn't expected. Marcos Espinoza, age 29, funeral home assistant. Employed under Kessler for nearly 5 years. Quiet, efficient, never the type to stir trouble. But now he was shaking like a leaf in the interrogation room. The video footage Marcus had collected had done damage, but not enough to hold up in court alone. They needed a first-hand witness. And when Marcos had shown up at the station the night before, eyes bloodshot, voice low, repeating, "I didn't know it would go that far." Over and over, Javier had felt the tide begin to turn. "I saw him do it," Marcus had said, his voice cracking. "Dr. Ryan, he came to the prep room the morning Gabriel was brought in. Said it was just precautionary, some vaccine to prevent tissue decay before embalming. But Gabriel, he was still warm." Javier hadn't spoken. Just let the kid unravel. Marcos had wrung his hands. "Kessler said it was classified. Military arrangement, he called it. Told me not to ask questions. Just move the body into the cold chamber, no tags, no autopsy request. He'd broken off, his breathing uneven. "I heard them," he added finally. "I wasn't supposed to be in the hallway, but I was. Rayan said, he's clean. Prime for harvesting." And Kessler said, "Then let's get it done before the dog starts barking." That had been enough. More than enough. Javier had typed up the warrant request himself. Now, with the clock ticking past 4:52 a.m., he slid the signed document into a folder, sealed it, and stood. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Outside his door, Marcus waited, leaning against the hallway wall, Shadow seated beside him like a statue of quiet defiance. Javier handed him the folder. "Judge signed off. We go in at 0600. Marcus didn't smile, but his eyes tightened with something close to relief. "That fast?" "The judge's son served with Gabriel in Afghanistan," Javier said. "You think I'm the only one who heard that interview?" Shadow rose, tail flicking once. Javier bent slightly and looked the dog in the eye. "Time to finish what you started, boy." 2 hours later, unmarked vehicles gathered at the edge of Hazelwood Cemetery, cloaked by early fog. Sheriff's deputies outfitted in soft body armor checked weapons, adjusted radios, double-checked their warrant packets. Marcus stood just outside the perimeter, hands in his coat pocket, trying to steady the tremble in his fingers. He wasn't scared. He was furious. Behind him, Shadow let out a low whuff, as if to say, "We're not alone in this." Gabriel had insisted on staying back. He still wasn't strong enough to walk without assistance, but when Marcus had shown him the warrant, the veteran had closed his eyes and whispered, "Don't let them bury anyone else." As the sun began to crest the hills, pink light cracking through the mist, Javier stepped in front of the gathered team. He held up the signed warrant. "Jonathan Kessler, Dr. Alton Rayan, we take them alive, we take them clean. No heroics. And if anything starts to burn, get the data first." He looked down at Shadow. "And if you see this dog move, you move with him." 30 minutes later, in the pale light of early morning, the squad descended on Hazelwood Funeral Home. No sirens, no warning, just boots on gravel, and the silent presence of a German shepherd, with fire in his blood. The sky above Hazelwood had just begun to tint gold when the funeral home's shadow stretched long across the gravel lot. A stillness blanketed the air, one that didn't feel peaceful but artificial, like something holding its breath beneath the surface. Sheriff Javier Cortez gave a single nod, and then they moved. 6 deputies swept in with practiced precision, boots soft on the damp earth. No sirens, no warning shots, just gloved hands, silent radios, and steel nerves. Marcus followed close behind, his breath tight in his chest. Shadow trotted beside him, focused, his eyes scanning each doorway as if he remembered the route from nightmares. They breached the front entrance with no resistance. The door wasn't even locked. Too easy. Inside, the parlor was dimly lit, untouched like time had stopped after the last funeral. Floral arrangements, half-wilted, brochures on polished oak, a photograph of Jonathan Kessler shaking hands with the senator hung slightly crooked on the wall, but no sign of Kessler, no sign of Dr. Rayan, only silence. Javier's voice broke through the earpieces. "Alpha team, secure the front. Bravo with me basement." Marcus felt Shadow tense. His ears flattened. His head turned toward the far hallway like a compass drawn by something unseen. Without a word, Marcus followed him. They found the stairwell behind a locked service door. Lewis had described it during his confession. A narrow, unlit descent beneath the prep room. The air grew colder with every step. Mold on the walls. Fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead like dying stars. Halfway down, Shadow stopped. A growl rumbled low in his throat. Not aggressive, but alert. Warning. Javier signaled the others to raise weapons. At the bottom of the stairs stood a thick steel door with a key-card reader. Marcos had remembered the code. Javier entered it. The lock hissed. The door creaked open, and everything changed. The cold hit them first. Not the chill of a basement, but industrial cold. Manufactured, preserved, designed to keep something from rotting. Shadow refused to enter at first. His nose quivered. Then he moved, one paw at a time. Inside was a large storage room with metal racks, each lined with containers, dozens of them, labeled not with names, but codes. O+, LVR 1107, AB, KDN 1022. The smell of antiseptic was overpowered only by something else beneath it. Blood. A deputy lifted one lid. Inside, an organ sealed in sterile packaging marked for international shipment. "Jesus," someone muttered. Javier scanned the nearby wall lined with shipping logs. Destinations: Mexico City, Singapore, Dubai. All recent, all frequent, each entry time-stamped down to the second. And then Shadow moved again. He sniffed toward a second door in the back, not steel but older wooden, reinforced with a horizontal bolt. He let out a sharp bark. Marcus pushed forward. "There's someone in there." A deputy kicked the bolt. The door flew open. And what they saw inside would haunt every man in that room for the rest of their lives. A man mid-30s chained to a hospital bed. IVs in both arms. Monitor beeping faintly in the background. His skin was pallid, cheeks sunken, eyes fluttering in and out of consciousness. A tag hung from his wrist. Javier Mendoza, RH null, hold for transfer. Javier moved to his side, instantly kneeling. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man's lips trembled. "Don't let them take more." His voice was barely air. Shadow stepped closer, nose brushing the side of the bed. Mendoza opened his eyes for a second and locked on to the dog. A sound escaped him, something like a laugh cut short by exhaustion. Marcus swallowed hard. "He's been here the whole time." They called in medics, called in the FBI, the room filled with voices, cameras, evidence bags, but none of it dulled the horror, not one bit. As Mendoza was wheeled out of the basement, his hand weakly found Shadow's fur. A whisper escaped him. "You're not just a dog, are you?" Shadow said nothing, but his eyes never left the hallway, not even as the man he helped save vanished behind swinging doors. On the way out, Marcus walked behind Javier, stunned by the sheer scale of the operation they'd uncovered. The bodies, the organs, the precision, this hadn't been a side hustle. It had been a business, a machine, and Gabriel had almost been another line item. Outside, a light drizzle had begun to fall, soft, almost cleansing. Javier stopped at the threshold, looking back. "Tell me we got enough," he muttered. Marcus nodded. "We did." Shadow stood at the exit, unmoving, his silhouette sharp against the dawn light. Javier stepped beside him. "We just cracked open hell," he said quietly. "Let's hope we're ready for the flames." The conference room at Hazelwood Medical wasn't built for truth. Not this kind. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, humming like insects circling a wound. Sheriff Javier Cortez stood at the head of the table, fingers braced against a stack of freshly printed documents, shipping logs, lab reports, medical charts, and a single photograph of Javier Mendoza, taken just an hour after they'd pulled him from that frozen tomb. His voice was low but sharp, the kind that didn't ask for attention, it commanded it. They were harvesting organs. No one moved. No one spoke. They staged deaths, Javier continued. Labeled healthy people as deceased, either through medical trickery or flat-out poisoning. Victims were selected for their rare blood types, compatible tissue profiles, or like Gabriel Moreno, for their pristine health. He looked up. Gabriel wasn't sick. He wasn't dying. He was marked. Shadow sat at the far end of the room, beside Marcus, like a sentinel carved from silence, his eyes locked on the sheriff, unmoving. The room was full: FBI liaison, local press, district coroner, Mayor Reardon, and 2 investigators from the Department of Veteran Affairs. All had reviewed the footage from the raid. All had heard the testimony from Marcos and seen the scar tissue on Javier Mendoza's abdomen, proof of harvesting already begun, and all looked like they were seeing the world from a slightly different angle now, as if it had shifted beneath their feet. Javier pulled a file and tossed it across the table. "Read it." It was a list, 10 names, all local, all recently deceased, all listed as natural causes. 5 were under the age of 40. 2 were veterans. 1 had gone missing after a routine checkup with Dr. Alton Ryan. "They were all processed through Kessler's funeral home," Javier said. "No autopsies, no family follow-up. All buried within 72 hours, and all of them had something in common: blood compatibility and clean medical profiles." Mayor Reardon paled. "Are you saying they've been doing this for years?" Javier's jaw clenched. "We have records dating back 11 years. A long silence filled the room. Then the VA rep leaned forward. "Gabriel Moreno was military. There's no way a funeral was processed that fast without a Department of Defense clearance." "Forgery," Marcus said quietly. "We found fake certificates. Dr. Ryan signed them. Kessler filed them." The FBI agent, a woman with cropped gray hair, flipped a logbook open. "And the shipping manifests. They're international. Dubai, Istanbul, private buyers, black market surgery rings. This wasn't a side hustle. It was industrial." Shadow gave a soft growl, as if even he understood. This was bigger than anyone had imagined. "Gabriel was lucky," Javier added, his voice tightening. "They didn't finish the process. Something went wrong. Maybe the dosage. Maybe they moved too fast. Maybe Shadow sensed it wasn't over." He turned his eyes to the dog. "Whatever it was, it saved his life." Marcus glanced down at Shadow, then slowly lifted his gaze to the others. "You all saw the footage," he said. "You know what this was. They called it a death certificate, but it was a hunting license. Gabriel wasn't the first. He almost wasn't even the last." He paused. "And Kessler and Ryan, they didn't just know. They built it." Across the table, the district attorney's fingers curled around his pen. "We'll issue full subpoenas, search warrants, every file, every shipment, every financial trail. If what you're saying is true—" "It is," Javier cut in. His voice didn't waver. "They were harvesting bodies like product, selecting people based on medical potential, staging deaths, selling parts of them to foreign buyers like cargo." He stepped back from the table. "And if Shadow hadn't howled when he did, we'd be burying a hero under a lie." For a moment, the weight of it all became too much. The silence wasn't just stillness. It was a form of mourning. Mourning for those already lost, and for the kind of safety everyone assumed they had. Gabriel had nearly been dissected, packaged, and shipped without a single soul questioning it. If not for a dog, A growl, a scratched coffin lid, and a heartbeat. Mayor Reardon cleared his throat. "So what now?" Javier's eyes met his. "We move. We arrest. We dismantle. Publicly. No more shadows. No more silence." Then he turned to the press liaison. "I want this on every outlet in the state by noon. Gabriel Moreno's story. Javier Mendoza's rescue. Shadow's warning, the evidence, all of it. We don't let them bury the truth." Shadow stood as if on cue. Marcus reached down, resting his hand gently on the dog's back. "You ready, boy?" Shadow didn't bark. But he didn't need to. The truth had emerged, and now it would burn. The day had turned cold, wind biting through Hazelwood's downtown like it knew what had just been unearthed. Outside the courthouse annex, a line of police cruisers flanked the steps as Dr. Alton Rayan Palo, handcuffed, silent, was escorted out by 2 deputies. His expression was hollow, but his eyes still flickered with defiance. The kind of man who never believed he'd fall. But it was Jonathan Kessler who never showed. He was supposed to be picked up hours ago. He wasn't home. His car was missing. And now, Sheriff Javier's radio crackled. "We've got movement, black van, no plates, corner of Pine and Alder, matching the vehicle seen outside the funeral home last week." Marcus's gut dropped. Javier responded, "Do not engage until backup arrives. I repeat." But the static cut off. And down the block, tires screeched. The van careened into view like a bullet. It tore down the side street, ignoring stop signs, its windows blacked out, engine roaring like panic incarnate. People on sidewalks shouted and scattered. The vehicle fishtailed onto Broadmoor Avenue toward the municipal parking lot behind the records building. And then they saw him, Kessler, running, a gray overcoat flapping behind him, briefcase in hand. He bolted from a side alley, hair disheveled, sweat staining his collar. His face was twisted in desperation, in knowing he'd been found out, and his only hope now was escape. Marcus and Shadow were already moving. They had been staking out the office nearby, waiting for transport updates. Now they were sprinting full speed toward the lot. The black van screeched to a halt, side door sliding open. Inside, 2 masked men. Kessler was 20 feet away. Marcus shouted, "Police! Stop!" Kessler didn't. But Shadow did. He broke formation, veered left, and launched. The world slowed. Marcus saw it all unfold, as if underwater. The ripple of muscle across Shadow's flanks, the blink of fear on Kessler's face, the sudden twist of bodies colliding. Kessler went down hard, briefcase flying, open papers, files, and something metallic spilling across the pavement. But one of the masked men leapt from the van, swinging a steel baton toward Marcus. Marcus ducked too late. The edge of the weapon caught his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The man raised the baton again, and Shadow was there. With a roar, something primal and sharp and full of fury, he lunged, clamping down on the attacker's forearm. The man screamed, dropping the baton. Blood splattered the asphalt. But the second man from the van was already moving. He reached for a concealed weapon, pulling a slim, silenced pistol from his waistband. Marcus shouted, "No!" A gunshot cracked. Shadow yelped. He stumbled sideways, his left side streaked with red. Marcus tackled the shooter before he could fire again. The weapon skidded across the ground. Fists collided, teeth cracked. The smell of blood and exhaust hung thick in the air. And through it all, Shadow, wounded, staggering, crawled to Marcus's side. He planted himself between Marcus and the downed man, growling through gritted pain, bleeding, but standing, Sirens blared as backup arrived. Deputies swarmed the scene. The two masked men were disarmed, cuffed, dragged screaming into the back of cruisers. Kessler, trying to crawl away, was pinned by Javier himself. The sheriff's hand clenched his collar with quiet rage. "You don't get to run," Javier said. "Not after what you did." Paramedics rushed in. Shadow collapsed beside Marcus, breathing hard, eyes fluttering. Marcus pressed his hands against the wound, just above the ribs. "You're okay, you hear me?" he whispered, voice shaking. "You're okay, boy." Shadow's tail moved once, a whisper of a wag. Later, as the crime scene was cordoned off and evidence tagged, officers found a tablet in Kessler's briefcase, encrypted files, foreign bank logs, patient profiles, proof that Gabriel Moreno had just been one more name on a long, bloody list. But he'd lived, and Kessler's plan had failed, not because of the law, not because of a system, but because of a dog who refused to let evil escape. As dusk bled into night, the sky turned the color of bruised lavender. Marcus sat on the curb beside the ambulance, Shadow's head resting on his thigh, IV line taped gently to the dog's paw. "You held him off," Marcus whispered. "You did it." Shadow didn't move much, but his breathing was steady. His eyes tired, yes, still watched the horizon, still guarding, still ready. Even now, Hazelwood was never supposed to make national news. It was a town of quiet streets and flag-lined porches, where grief usually came gently. But now, grief roared from within. The morning after Kessler's arrest, the town square felt like it was holding its breath. Signs blanketed the courthouse steps. "Where are our autopsies?" "Truth doesn't need a casket." "List the names." People held up photos of fathers, wives, siblings, faces buried through Kessler's funeral home. Silence burned louder than sirens. Maria Estrada clutched a photo of her son Diego. They said it was natural, but his eyes were open when they brought him in. I wonder if he ever had a chance. Around her, grief unraveled Hazelwood one buried secret at a time. At home, Gabriel Moreno watched on a grainy TV. Shadow, bandaged but healing, lay at his feet. Gabriel stroked his head. "You dragged me back from the grave, then threw yourself into hell to make sure it stuck." Shadow exhaled softly as if he understood. That evening, Marcus arrived. "They're protesting at City Hall. People want a full audit. Some want the bodies exhumed." Gabriel's voice was quiet but firm. "Let them. Every soul deserves someone to say, 'You mattered.'" Sheriff Javier spoke at a candle vigil. "We failed you, as law enforcement, as neighbors. That ends now." The crowd applauded, not loud, but real. Later, Clara knocked on Gabriel's door, trembling. "They said my husband died of a stroke, but his death certificate looks just like yours." She glanced at Shadow. "He tried to warn me. I see that now." Gabriel let her in. Hazelwood wasn't just grieving, it was awake. The next day, at a press conference, Gabriel stood beside Shadow. "My name is Major Gabriel Moreno. I bled for this country. I buried brothers. I thought peace was something we earned, but peace is a lie when evil wears a name tag." He told of waking in his coffin, not from God's will, but profit-driven betrayal. "This dog saved my life twice, once under fire, once in a graveyard. He didn't bark. He didn't need to. His loyalty spoke louder than the lies that buried me." He looked out over the crowd. "We were lied to, and we will not forget." Applause swelled, first a ripple, then thunder. Outside, Sheriff Javier held up a folder. "Evidence in progress. We're filing charges against Kessler and Rayen, and reopening every questionable death certificate from the last 12 years. Bring your records, bring your doubts. No stone will be left unturned." That night, the town moved with purpose. Flyers about the trial appeared on telephone poles. The florist reopened to deliver white roses. In a bakery window, a photo of Gabriel and Shadow bore the caption, "Truth has 4 legs and a name." Then came the letters. The first slipped under Gabriel's door at dawn. "Shut it down, or next time, the dog won't make it." Marcus handed it to Gabriel. He read it, folded it, set it aside. But his eyes stayed unblinking for a long time. 2 more followed. "Not everyone in this town wants the past dug up. Back off before your hero dog disappears." Javier read them, jaw tight. "Locals, scared of getting dragged down." Gabriel's voice was cold. "They buried me once. A few threats won't stop them from trying again. But they forgot this dog doesn't forget a scent, and I don't forget betrayal." That night, porch lights stayed on. Shadow stood guard. Neighbors walked by more often, not curious, but protective. Pastor Edmund left a casserole. 2 teenage volunteers patrolled the street. Old Mrs. Langford placed her husband's war medals in her window. Hazelwood had learned to stand its ground. Then came one last letter. No threat, just shaky cursive. "My father died 2 years ago. They said heart failure, but I believe you now. I'm ready to talk." R.L. Gabriel handed it to Marcus, and for the first time since it began, the silence in the room wasn't fear. It was resolve. Hazelwood was done being quiet. Now it was learning how to roar. By sunrise, the courthouse in Hazelwood was surrounded. Veterans, parents clutching photos, reporters, people came not for a hearing or campaign, but for something heavier, reckoning. Inside, the courtroom strained to contain the storm. The prosecution's table overflowed with evidence. Kessler sat rigid, Rayen pale and sweating. The judge called order. The trial began. "This is not just fraud," the DA said. "It is murder disguised as procedure." He held up a forged death certificate. "Gabriel Moreno, declared dead. No autopsy, body sealed in a casket within hours." He dropped a sheaf of papers. "But Gabriel Moreno is alive." Gasps. The DA continued, "And he is not the only one." Evidence mounted. Fake shipping records, black market organ reports, testimony of falsified deaths. Then came the key witness, Gabriel. He entered slowly, cane in hand, Shadow steady at his side. "I remember the shot," Gabriel said. "The cold, the darkness. I thought I was gone until I heard Shadow. He brought me back." He pointed at Kessler. "They didn't make a mistake. They tried to silence me." Objection. Sustained. But the truth had been heard. Later, Marcos played his secret recording. Rayen. "He's got the markers. It's clean." Kessler. "No autopsy. Seal the coffin. Standard grieving script." The room froze. Jurors pale, Kessler speechless. The DA only said, "That was not a mistake." By day's end, the nation watched. Shadow Nose trended, but inside the courtroom, all that mattered was the jury's silent, shaken faces. The final day came with cold drizzle. The room filled, a hush like church. Shadow entered, nails clicking, every step heavy with meaning. People stood, out of respect. The judge allowed him to stay. Kessler sneered, "Mangy beast." Shadow stood, still, growling low, teeth bared, not fear, but recognition. Gabriel's voice rose. He always knew who the enemy was. The room stilled, cameras flashed, the moment spread, the dog who knew the truth. Gabriel spoke again. "I woke in a coffin because of them. They thought no one would care. But I had a voice, and it was his." He looked down. Shadow leaned against him, head low. The jury filed out. Shadow never looked away from Kessler. Some truths don't need words, just memory, and the silence that follows a growl. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Wooden benches creaked as families leaned forward. Hands were clasped tight, some in prayer, some in rage. And at the center of it all, the two men who had once moved in silence behind locked doors and falsified papers now sat in shackles under fluorescent lights, exposed. Kessler didn't flinch. Rayan looked down, eyes fixed on the table like the grain of the wood could offer forgiveness. Shadow was there too, curled at Gabriel's feet. His tail lay motionless, ears alert. His body bore the healing scar from where he'd stopped Kessler's last escape. But it was his stillness that said the most. He knew this was the final moment. The gavel fell once. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Karen Whitmore adjusted her glasses. She looked exhausted, like the weight of weeks spent listening to horror had finally carved into her bones. "Mr. Jonathan Kessler and Dr. Elias Rayan," she began, voice unwavering. "You stand before this court convicted of 24 counts of aggravated conspiracy, 18 counts of unlawful body handling, 12 counts of medical fraud, and 9 counts of attempted murder." She let the list hang. "In addition, the court recognizes a pattern of deliberate abuse of trust, violation of the deceased, and a gross systemic betrayal of the public good." Kessler leaned back in his chair. Not smug, just hollow. Rayan closed his eyes. The judge continued, voice growing harder with each word. "This wasn't a mistake. This was inhuman. Cold, calculated. The kind of evil that wears a tie and smiles at grieving families." Her gavel hand trembled slightly as she reached for the final page of sentencing. "For these reasons, and with unanimous recommendation from the jury, this court sentences both defendants to life in federal prison, without the possibility of parole." Silence. Then the room erupted, not in gasps, not in screams, but applause. Long, echoing applause like thunder rolling through grief. Veterans rose first, then mothers, then sons of the buried, then daughters who never got to say goodbye, and finally Gabriel. His hands trembling placed one hand on Shadow's back. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. A tear slipped down his cheek, carving a path through his weathered face like rain on marble. Kessler looked back only once at Gabriel, and Gabriel, calm but unwavering, met his stare. That one look said everything. "You buried me alive, and I lived to bury your name." Outside the courthouse, camera crews surged forward as the crowd spilled out under a now brilliant afternoon sky. The courthouse bell chimed noon. Church bells across Hazelwood answered, as if the whole town had been waiting for this reckoning. Gabriel sat quietly on the courthouse steps as reporters shouted questions. But it was Shadow they focused on, lying at his side, head high. A boy in a school uniform tugged his mother's hand and whispered, "That's him. That's the hero." Gabriel looked down at Shadow, smiling through tears. "They got what they deserved," he murmured. "Now maybe the rest of us can start healing." The town of Hazelwood didn't return to normal. It grew into something else. On the third morning after sentencing, the mist rolled low over the hills like a breath the town had held for too long finally exhaled. At the corner of Main and Bellevue, outside the modest rehab center, Gabriel Moreno stood with trembling legs, gripping parallel bars. His left knee trembled. His right shoulder sagged beneath the weight of healing nerves. But beside him, as always, was Shadow. The German shepherd pressed in gently against Gabriel's side, sensing every wobble before it happened. He didn't bark. He didn't move unless Gabriel did. It was the fourth step that counted. Because for the first time since he'd clawed back from a coffin, Gabriel didn't fall. He didn't flinch. He walked. One foot, then another. Each motion slow, deliberate, like placing trust back into the world one step at a time. By the fifth his eyes stung, not from pain, but memory. And the nurse behind him whispered with awe, "He's doing it." But Gabriel wasn't listening. He was whispering something to Shadow through clenched teeth. "You brought me back once. Now you're helping me stand." Shadow looked up, and for a heartbeat, just one, the old soldier saw the battlefield in those eyes again. Dust, smoke, gunfire, loyalty. Still here, still fighting. Elsewhere, in corners of Hazelwood rarely visited, families began to gather. Real memorials took form, not the forced, rushed goodbyes arranged by falsified death certificates, but quiet, sincere farewells. People returned to exhumed plots, reburied loved ones properly, lit candles not just for grief, but for release. At the church, Isabel knelt beside her brother's new headstone, no longer marked by a false date. She placed a single white lily, whispering, "They found you." Beside her, the church's bell rang once, then again, and throughout the town, names long buried were spoken aloud, finally honored, no longer erased, no longer stolen. Marco stood alone by the courthouse steps, unsure what to do with the attention. He'd once been invisible, just an assistant, just someone who swept floors and looked the other way. But now people were approaching him, not to scold, but to thank. A young mother hugged him without a word. An old man pressed a folded letter into his hand. Someone even called him a hero. But Marcos didn't believe in that word. He'd seen true courage, and it didn't look like standing in court. It looked like a dog refusing to leave a casket. He turned, watching from afar as Gabriel stepped slowly from the van, Shadow at his side. When their eyes met, Gabriel offered a nod, and that was enough. At dusk, Marcus Hale stood before a headstone marked Daniel Hale, beloved brother, loyal son. The wind was quiet, rustling only the smallest leaves. For years Marcus had avoided this place, not out of hate, but because there were no answers then, only questions. Now, he knew the truth. The falsified certificate, the blood type, the missing autopsy, the name that never should have been erased. He sank to one knee. "I'm sorry it took me this long," he whispered, fingers brushing the stone's edge. "But we found them, and we stopped them." Behind him, Shadow sat silently. No command had been given, no gesture. He had simply followed, like he always did. And for the first time in years, Marcus didn't feel rage. He felt peace. That night, As the town lights flickered on like small stars reclaimed from darkness, Gabriel stood by his window. Shadow lay curled nearby, breathing slow and steady. There were no reporters now, no sirens, no gurneys or injections or locked doors. Only stillness. Outside, a boy rode his bike across the square. A girl chased him laughing, her voice rising over the breeze. Someone somewhere was playing a piano, softly, off-key, but full of life. And in that gentle lull between pain and peace, Gabriel whispered the words he hadn't dared to speak aloud. "We're still here." Shadow's ears twitched once, then stilled. The world didn't need to understand what they'd been through, but Hazelwood did. And it was healing. It began with a whisper. Just a quiet suggestion passed from one neighbor to another, from one grief-stricken family to the next. "Let's light a candle." No speeches. No grand ceremony. Just flame. And so, on the first Saturday after the sentencing, Hazelwood gathered beneath a sky dusted in starlight. The chill of early fall clung to the air, but no one seemed to mind. They came in silence, cradling lanterns and tea lights, flashlights wrapped in cloth, and long wax candles still warm from the match. By the time the clock tower struck 7, the cemetery hill glowed like a field of fireflies. Shadow stood at the center of it all. He didn't bark. He didn't move much. He simply stood by Gabriel's side, his black and tan coat catching the light like burnished armor. For many, it was their first time seeing the dog up close, the same creature who refused to accept a death that wasn't real, the same soul who pulled truth back from the brink. Some approached slowly, eyes misting as they knelt to lay small tributes at his feet. Collars, photos, letters folded in half and sealed with trembling fingers. A child no older than 7 placed a frayed stuffed animal beside the bronze plaque that had just been installed at the front gate. It read, "For the ones almost forgotten, for the dog who remembered." Beneath it, etched smaller, "Shadow, K9 veteran, lifesaver, witness, hero." As people gathered, candles flickering in shaky hands, Gabriel stepped forward. He had no speech prepared, no note cards. His voice cracked from the first word. "I was buried alive," he said, the silence so deep it rang. "And I was ready to disappear, to let it happen." He paused, looking down at Shadow, who gazed back with eyes too knowing for this world. "But this dog, this soul beside me, wouldn't let them bury the truth." He looked up, sweeping his gaze across the crowd, across farmers in denim jackets, students in school sweatshirts, elderly couples bundled in scarves. So many had lost someone. And now they stood together. "We didn't just uncover a crime," he continued. "We reclaimed something that should have never been stolen: dignity, memory, justice." A murmur of agreement rippled through the vigil. Tears slid silently down cheeks. Arms wrapped around shoulders. One by one, candles were raised higher. It was less protest, more prayer. A shared vow: never again. As the crowd began to move through the cemetery paths, each person passed the bronze plaque. Some touched it. Others paused, lips pressed in quiet thanks. But all felt the same thing: a shift. Hazelwood was no longer a town weighed down by unanswered questions. It was a town that remembered, that refused silence, that had followed a howl into the dark and found something worth protecting on the other side. Marcus Hale stood beneath an old elm tree, hand in his pocket, a faint smile on his lips as he watched Gabriel walk slowly along the candlelit path. Shadow pacing at his side, like a sentinel reborn. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was enough. A few feet away, Marcos stood alone, shoulders squared for the first time in weeks. When a woman passed and whispered, "Thank you," he nodded, almost imperceptibly. His redemption wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. And somewhere behind the soft wall of flickering light, Isabel clutched her brother's photo against her chest, whispering something only he could hear. Later that night, long after most had gone home, Shadow remained near the plaque. Gabriel sat on the nearby bench, hands folded over a cane, watching the breeze stir the flame of the last candle still lit. "Funny," he murmured, "how the dead teach the living to fight." Shadow didn't move, but when Gabriel leaned closer, resting a hand gently on the dog's back, he felt it, the steady rhythm of breath, of life, of loyalty that didn't require words. "You remembered," he whispered, "when no one else did." And the stars above Hazelwood shimmered just a little brighter, as if the universe, too, had paused to pay its respects. The morning sun rose over Hazelwood, casting gold across rooftops and chasing dew from the courthouse lawn. For once, the square wasn't just quiet, it was reverent. Veterans stood in full dress, children sat cross-legged, and shopkeepers had closed early. At the center stood the statue 6 feet of bronze, Shadow immortalized mid-stride, ears alert, eyes focused, one paw resting on a folded flag. Gabriel Moreno stepped forward, cane in hand, Shadow pacing solemnly beside him. The crowd parted for them without being asked. Gabriel looked at the statue, then down at Shadow, the real one, who sat calmly, breathing steady. "Some lives are saved with machines," Gabriel began, voice hoarse but firm. "Others with miracles. Mine was saved by memory and a dog who refused to forget what the world wanted to erase." He placed his hand on Shadow's head. "I've made peace with what we carry and what we bury, but nothing prepared me for waking up inside my own coffin. And when I did, it wasn't sirens that pulled me back, it was a howl, his howl." Gabriel paused, swallowing emotion. "Shadow saved me. But more than that, he reminded us what loyalty means, the kind that waits, that remembers, that fights for truth when no one else will." He pulled away the drape. The town gasped, not in surprise, but in recognition. The engraving read, "Shadow, K9 Unit Number 093, Loyalty Beyond Death, Truth Beyond Silence." Below it, "Dedicated to all those who were nearly forgotten, and to the one who remembered them all." As Amazing Grace played softly, Gabriel knelt and whispered to Shadow, "Thank you for not giving up." Shadow nudged his palm, resting his head on Gabriel's knee. People approached to leave tokens: a ribboned leash, a scout badge, a pressed poppy. Marcus stood at the back, murmuring, "You earned it, buddy." When the ceremony ended, Gabriel and Shadow walked home through town. People stepped aside respectfully. A baker offered Shadow a biscuit. Children whispered, "That's the dog who saved everyone." Marcus gave a subtle nod. Isabel, standing outside the diner, touched her heart as they passed. At the edge of town, Gabriel stopped at a bench overlooking the lake. Shadow rested at his feet. "It's not just about surviving," Gabriel said quietly. "It's about living true." Shadow laid his chin on Gabriel's boot. The town behind them healed. The statue behind them shone. That night, the house was still. Gabriel lay beneath a wool blanket, firelight flickering gently. Shadow curled at the foot of the bed, unmoving since they'd returned. "You don't have to protect me anymore," Gabriel whispered, tears finally coming, not for pain, but gratitude. Shadow stirred, rested his head on Gabriel's chest. Their breaths synced. No more commands, no more battles. Just presence. Outside, stars shimmered. Evelyn's reminders that someone's always watching. Gabriel believed in this. The dog beside him. The peace they'd found. The fire dimmed, but warmth remained, the kind that comes when the war is over, when good came from struggle, when home is real. Shadow didn't move. He matched Gabriel's breath. A man and his dog, at last, at peace. In a world too often marked by betrayal and silence, this story reminds us that loyalty still speaks loudest, even without words. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was a guardian, a survivor, and a living testimony to the truth that some bonds never break, even when the world tries to bury them. German shepherds like Shadow are more than companions. They are protectors, empaths, and heroes in fur. Their instincts don't lie. Their devotion doesn't waver. And their actions time and again have saved lives, uncovered wrongs, and brought light into the darkest corners. This story is not only about justice, it's about the quiet power of presence, of a dog who remembered when others forgot, of a town that stood up when it mattered most. So tonight, wherever you are, hold your pets a little closer. Listen to the silence between their breaths. And remember, sometimes the strongest voice in the room has 4 legs and doesn't speak a word, because loyalty, like Shadow's, can change the world, and love like that, it never dies.